The Nate Dogg Show.
Welcome back to the Nate Dogg Show, installment 2 of 3. Christ, the perfect prophet, the perfect priest, and the perfect king. Here's the perfect king with Tom Roscoe.
Hey, Nate wanted me to talk about Christ, the perfect king. Hard to do in 2 minutes or less. No, you don't have to record that, Nate. It's hard to do in a limited amount of time, but let me just peg it for you. Christ is the perfect king because Isaiah prophesied in Isaiah chapter 9, verses 6 through 7, where he talked about the king that would be born. As unto you a child is born, and the government will be upon his shoulders, and of his government there will be no end. Now, that was the prophetic utterance of Isaiah announcing or proclaiming that Christ would be the king to come. Now, zip forward couple thousand years, and you see Christ and his life being exemplified in perfection. Luke chapter 2, verse 29, right at the very start, when he's just a young boy, he's a teenager. You guys might be familiar with the story. He gets left in the temple by his parents. They come back to find him, and they ask him, what are you doing here? And he says, you should have known I must be about my Father's business. So even as a teenager, he was about his Father's business, doing the perfect will of God. And then in John chapter 8, verses 28 and 29, Jesus again showing that he's all about doing God's will and about fulfilling God's plan. He says, I speak and do the things that I hear from the Father. So he was, again, there he is, he's doing God's will. He's speaking things that God wanted him to speak, and that's all he's doing. He's obedient to the plan and obedient to the will of God. Even to the point of death. You guys remember the story in the Garden of Gethsemane, where Jesus says, he's praying, he says, Father, take this cup, make this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not my will, but your will be done. So Christ was obedient to God's command to the nth degree. Hebrews chapter 4, verse 14 says that we have a sympathetic high priest, and it was referring to Jesus, who was in all ways tempted like us, yet was without sin. So there we see that Christ is the perfect king. He was prophesied. His life exemplified it. And because he's the perfect king, prophesied, exemplified, we need to live a life where the king will be glorified. Now, all of you know what the purpose of the king is, right? The purpose of the king is to rule and to reign. And where does the king rule and reign from? He reigns from his throne. So as believers in Christ, you and I, we need to live a life that's above reproach. And it should be intuitively obvious to the most casual observer that you've been changed. And that Christ, the king, the perfect king, rules upon the throne of your heart. That's Christ, the perfect king. The King of Kings, the Lord of Lords.